Special coverage of today's attacks in Brussels. The self-proclaimed Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attacks, some of which took place close to European Union buildings. The group issued a statement saying, quote, "We promise the Crusader Alliance against the Islamic State that they will have black days in return for their aggression against the Islamic State." Belgian Prime Minister Charles Michel responded with, "Belgium is very mobilized to succeed in the face of this tragic event, which has struck us in our hearts. We are determined to defend our freedom." While the Brussels bombings are only the latest attacks on the West from the Islamic State group, they point to a worrying trend in Europe. To discuss more, I'm joined now by Henderson Cooper, former LAPD analyst on Middle East terrorism and former CIA counterterrorism officer. Welcome to the program, sir. What was your reaction to news today, specifically the fact that despite all the airport security, these men were still able to detonate multiple bombs?
Well, it's a very unfortunate situation, and I'm very sorry it happened, and my heart goes out to all those people in Brussels. The fact is, law enforcement, the intelligence community, the military will never know ahead of time what is going to happen, particularly when it isn't state-sponsored or run by a government or an organization that can easily be monitored. Things like this can happen because rogue players, individuals can do things without there being notice. Simply the matter of the way things work out when there is not an infrastructure built up behind a criminal group.
Well, that's interesting you say that these attacks can still happen and that it's impossible really to prevent them. I mean, what do you think the response of the Belgian government will be? Will we see an increase in surveillance and police presence despite, like you just said, the fact that may not ever be able to prevent attacks like this?
Well, it's the job of law enforcement, it's the job of the military, it's the job of the intelligence community to work at being on top of safety, security, and the flow of intelligence. It is a process, but unfortunately, you don't know what you don't know. There are individuals that you may have on your radar that you're watching, and you will deploy your people, and you will protect people, and you will have the increased numbers that are necessary to do the job. But for those that you don't know about, it's impossible to keep up with them. And we seem to have people, being born every other day with a new idea of getting involved in this jihad.
Well, what do you make of then some of the solutions being proposed by people here at home? I mean, you had GOP presidential candidate Ted Cruz has called for increased surveillance of Muslim communities in the U.S., saying, quote, "We need to empower law enforcement to patrol and secure Muslim neighborhoods before they become radicalized." I think many Americans might like to know what exactly that means. But from your perspective, as someone who's worked in this very vein of law enforcement, what's your reaction to a call like that?
Well, I tend not to spend much time paying attention to what politicians say. Our leaders are speaking to the people and saying what they believe the people need to hear. The reality is law enforcement and the intelligence community, they have to get out in the streets, they have to beat the bushes, they have to talk to people, they have to find who knows what they don't know. That's the only way we're going to stay ahead of these things. And for those things that we do know, we need to have our officers and our intelligence people in the field, monitoring systems, and working every angle that they can to stay as current as they can with what is possible out there.
I want to take a look at the words of the self-proclaimed Islamic State itself when it talks about why they conduct these types of attacks, hoping to spark a disproportionate response from Western governments when it comes to surveillance and war. This is a quote from an article written in Dabiq, which is the official magazine of the group. It says, quote, "The Muslims in the West will find themselves between one of two choices. They either apostatize and adopt the Kufri or infidel religion propagated by Bush, Obama, Blair, Cameron, and Sarkozy, and Hollande in the name of Islam, so as to live amongst the infidels without hardship, or they perform hijrah or immigrate to the Islamic State and thereby escape persecution from the Crusader governments and citizens. That's a quote from the magazine. So the damage we saw seemed to require I'm sorry, that is not what I had actually planned to say next. Just if I could get your point on that quote, which is that it plays into their hand a little bit to advocate for increased security.
Well, it's classic art of war, divide and conquer. When you want to create disruption, you want to do things that make loud noises, big bangs, cause a reaction. The reaction is never attractive. It's never attractive to see a police car rolling down the street with red lights and siren. It's never attractive to see armed officials, officers, or soldiers getting out of vehicles with big guns, wearing big vests, and they know that the public has a reaction to those kinds of things. So it plays into their art of war hands that they can do an action and create a reaction by the government that the people will see, and then they will put their spin on what that all means. They will say that it is the oppressors. They will say that they are being having their rights infringed. It's a classic art of war concept.
So fortunate to get your perspective on this, Mr. Henderson Cooper.
I go by Coop. It's a little easier.
All right, Coop, we can remember that easily. Former LAPD analyst on Middle East terrorism and former CIA counterterrorism officer.